Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for The Host, which is episode 23 of season 4 of Star Trek Next Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation one episode at a time. In this video I cover the 4th season episode, The Host. So The Host is the episode where Beverly has a romance with a visiting ambassador, Odon, who is a Trill, and he's charged with preventing a war. However, a shuttlecraft accident occurs where he is fatally wounded, in which it's revealed that he, in fact, is actually this parasite, this worm that lives inside the host's body, and he says that the host body is near death, but he is, the symbiont can survive, and that's what Beverly needs to save. So, in a desperate move, because they sent another host body from Trill, but it would take 72 hours to get there, so they come up with the idea. Riker, in fact, volunteers to become the temporary host so that the symbiont doesn't die. So the symbiont Odon emerges with Riker, and he resumes the negotiations to try to prevent the war. In the meantime, he struggles with his love for Beverly, who is not receptive to the fact that he is this worm-like creature who is now in the body of a longtime friend who she considers like a brother, and so is having difficulty continuing the relationship with him in Riker's body. They do hook up one night, though, and they seem to resume the romance, and Odon in Riker's body successfully negotiates peace. However, Riker's body is rejecting the symbiont, as humans were not meant to carry them, and so Riker is at risk of dying. So Odon insists on being removed, regardless of whether or not a replacement host has showed up. But a host does come just in the nick of time, but Beverly is dismayed to learn that the new host is a woman. So, Odon in her new host body comes to Crusher and wants to resume the romance, but Crusher states that she's just calls it a human failing, but saying that they're just not used to this constantly swapping bodies and being a different person, and it's not something she can keep up with. So, let's get this out of the way right at the top, right at the start. Let's just state the obvious. This is the introduction of the Trill, and they're absolutely, positively nothing like they are in Deep Space Nine. I've talked about this repeatedly, that Deep Space Nine should have just called them something else, because they are essentially not the Trill. The only similarity is the symbiont, which looks kind of similar but a bit different. This one bulges, and the other one, even when they take the symbiont out of his body, it's just sitting there in a petri dish, is sitting there bulging. The ones symbionts in DS9 don't do that, but having a symbiotic relationship and there being a symbiont is the only similarity with the Trill. They look different, and everyone's told the story about how they actually did a test with this makeup, with Terry Farrell wearing the makeup in this episode with the weird forehead, but Rick Berman deemed that it was hiding her attractiveness, and so he changed the makeup to make it something where she could be more attractive, so they gave her spots instead, which became the official look for the Trill going forward. But more than just the appearance, everything about the Trill is different. In this episode, they state they're not allowed to use the transporter because it could kill the symbiont. That's disregarded in Deep Space Nine. It's nobody knows about the Trill in this episode. They're shocked to learn that it's a symbiont when it's been established in Deep Space Nine that the Trill have been around in the Federation for a long time. Dax was in fact a Starfleet officer for 80 years or so, and everyone knew that Dax was a symbiont when that the Trill were a joint species, and the Klingons do this because they made a blood oath with Dax or whatnot, and here they have no idea what the Trill are. But the major point of difference, I think, in this episode is highly implied that, in fact, the terminology they use, the body is only a host, is that the symbiont takes full control over the host body, that the host is just a host, it's just a shell, and the symbiont is the one actually operating everything. Which is not what it is in Deep Space Nine. Deep Space Nine in the earliest season went out of their way to show that it's a joining, that the host brings something to the personality, and so does the symbiont. And so every time a symbiont joins a different host, it's practically a new person, because the two personalities merge to make up a new individual person. And this seems, I'll get more into this when we get to Deep Space Nine, because I totally get this. This makes total sense to me, but I've heard some other people really struggle with this and not get what the Trill are about, but I do. It makes total sense to me. But anyway, it's not what it is here. And in fact, there's a deleted scene on the Blu-ray, which I just saw for the first time today, that states this implicitly. It's when Odan is in Riker's body, he goes to play poker with Data and Worf and Geordi, and Geordi says, "Oh yes, come in, Commander," and Data's like, "Actually, the correct term is ambassador." And so they ask him about, "Well, have you played poker before?" Because he starts playing poker and throws the chips, and Odan's like, "No, I've never played this game before in my life, but Riker knows how to play it, and I can sense this." And he's like, "This is unusual for me. I'm not used to gleaming knowledge and experience from the host body. Usually when I take over a host, I get nothing from them and I'm in complete control. And this is a weird experience that I'm getting some of Riker's instincts and urges." And in fact, this is hinted at in a later scene when Picard is talking to Odan and telling him how dire the situation is and war could break out if any mistakes are made during negotiations. And then Odan says, "Well, I'll just have to make sure I don't make any mistakes." And Picard kind of smirks, and then Odan's like, "Did I say something wrong?" And then Picard answers, "Well, no, it's just that you sounded a lot like Riker there." And Odan seems uncomfortable by this and changes the subject. Which actually it makes more sense once you see in a deleted scene. It piggies back off the fact that he's not used to aspects of Riker's personality coming out like that, and it's unsettling for him. So, entirely incredibly different than the Trill and Deep Space Nine that are true joining, that the host and the symbiont join together to form a new personality where both their personalities contribute to a whole. So that I think is the biggest retcon. So essentially, Trill are nothing alike. They shouldn't even be called the Trill in Deep Space Nine. They should have just made up a new species. And it's maybe to have a line of dialogue being like, "Oh, isn't this like the Trill that," like O'Brien could say this or something, "This is like the Trill that we encountered at one time." And they'd be like, no, it's totally different. It's a similar concept where you have a joining, but it's actually totally different because they took over the body entirely where we joined together. Like, that's what they should have done. I'm sorry, they should have. Or maybe not even mention this stupid episode and just come up with call it something else. Because it was obviously based off the Trill in this episode, but they made it so incredibly different that it's not really the Trill. So this episode, it's hard to watch it because it stands out as it's worse than the changes they made for the Cardassians or the Bajorans, which I'll get into the Bajoran changes pretty soon with Ensign Rowe. But this is worse to the point where it's not even the same race, and they just should have called it something different. They just should have. Cool. Now that's out of the way. This episode, to me, fails at what it attempts to do. In fact, I never feel a connection with Beverly and O'Don. The episode begins with them making out in love, and they sort of try to fuck with Data to get him to go away. And then it jumps straight from that to O'Don taking over Riker's body, and then Crusher is having difficulty. And then that scene with her doing the pedicure, which kind of, when Troy shows up and talks to her, that kind of reminded me of the whole aerobic stretching thing, but not nearly as bad. And the whole dialogue there about the way that Crusher's acting, being all shy and nervous about it and trying to hide it from everyone. I think this whole episode kind of ruined Crusher's character, or did her dirty. Because she was acting, I think, not just the ending, which I'll get there, but throughout the entire episode, was acting pretty adolescent. Even before the whole thing with, the symbiont taking over Riker, she's acting very adolescent and just childish, I would say, throughout most of the episode. And so they get into this melodrama later where Crusher is agonizing over, oh my god, what is this? The person I love is in Riker's body, and how can I accept this? And I'm struggling with this. And they have the scene with them together, and he tries to kiss her, and she's like, no, I just can't do it, and she's pissed off. I'm not invested in any of this. This all falls flat to me and comes off as over-the-top melodrama because I was never invested in this relationship. And I think that's a key thing. I talked in the last episode I reviewed, I talked about this, how that relationship which was Half a Life, the relationship with Loaxan, Troy, and Timothy was earned. It was done so well, and you had them, you saw the chemistry that they had. You saw that they complemented each other. You saw that he was in love with her, and you saw them grow to appreciate each other, not just... they didn't even make out or get it on until 3/4 through the episode. But you saw the romance they had even before that. Where here you don't see the romance, you just see them making out. You see him give her flowers and that romantic, but it all rings hollow, really. And I think the whole thing about it with him calling her Dr. Beverly was a obvious contrivance, so that once he joins Riker's body, that he could say something that signifies that it's not Riker, that it's O'Don. So they have to have O'Don have a nickname for Beverly, so he can say Dr. Beverly. And I don't know. And so I don't think so it's funny, I usually agree with Ronald D. Moore, but I totally disagree with him on this episode because he had a quote saying that the original pitch or the original idea for this episode didn't have the romance, saying it was about the war, and saying that the episode didn't work until we made it about the romance and it was about our characters, and so then it was Star Trek. And I gotta disagree. I think this romance sucks. I think it fails, and I think if it was about the war, then it would have been a way more interesting episode. In fact, they build up the whole conflict of the war, the B plot, it's the A and B moon, and they're fighting over resources, and Odon had negotiated this treaty years ago, and they're abstinence, rah, rah, rah. And then the whole entire storyline is resolved off screen. Odon goes in for 6-hour negotiations. 6-hour negotiations. Six. I don't know if I said that. Anyway, he goes in for 6-hour negotiations, and we see Picard and Beverly like pacing and worrying and waiting, and then Riker comes out and is like, "It worked! No war," and then collapse. And that's all we get. What the fuck? That is such a ripoff. Like, why are they doing us dirty like that? I'm sorry, maybe it's just me, but I found this war plot way more interesting than this thrown together shoddy romance. And there's like some scenes in particular, I didn't write it down or anything, but some scenes in particular with Beverly and Odon that I just feel like Beverly's just being stupid. And they're being, more to the point, they're both being overly dramatic. They're like being melodramatic about it. And it's like, the dude you love is now in another dude. Get over it. I'm just a dude playing another dude. Sorry, I don't know the full quote. But I know. It would be weird. Like if I think about it in that terms, if I was in love with a woman and she died, but her mind and her essence got transplanted into one of my good friends who I think of a sister, yeah, it would be fucking weird. It would be very weird. So I get that, but I just think that they over dramatize it. They like the scene when Troy is talking to Beverly in 10 Forward, and Troy's like, "Look at him," when she comes in. Like I kind of liked what Troy was saying at first. Like the scene was good at the start with her talking about her father was the one man I loved and I'd do anything to see him again. I think that was good. But when Odon steps into 10 Forward and Beverly and Troy's like, "Look at him," and Beverly like, "No, I can't look at him," and then I think that's when Troy tells the story about her father and convinces her to, and she turns and looks and she looks so upset, and Riker's like, and the music swells, and Riker is like, "Oh my god," looking all upset and all smitten. And I'm just like, come on, like, you're not earning any of this melodrama. It just comes off as goofy to me. I'm sorry. I'm very sorry, but it does. It just does. So then there's a scene where new host comes and da-da-da-da! Ha-ha! Shocker! Twist! It's a woman who's the new host. Dun, dun, dun. Now, this is something I talked about. I did a video about the representation of LGBTQ community in Star Trek, with a particular focus on the Deep Space Nine episode Rejoined. And I mentioned this episode just to point out that other people were mentioning this episode in regards to LGBTQ representation, and they fucking shouldn't. And I pointed that out. I was like, this episode is not an example, good or bad, of really, I mean, it skims very, like, superficially skims the subject, but not in any significant way. I think shouldn't even be mentioned when talking about LGBTQ representation in Star Trek. In fact, the only reason why I mentioned it is because to point out that it shouldn't be mentioned, because other people have been mentioning. In fact, I remember watching a video there. It was like, oh, let's talk about all the important LGBTQ representation in Star Trek, and they spent like 5 minutes on this episode and didn't even fucking mention Rejoin. That pissed me off. Rejoined, I think, is the most important LGBTQ representation this side of Discovery, obviously. Not only does it actually feature a same-sex kiss, but the whole episode is a metaphor, and I think a very good one. Now, some people disagree with me on this. In my personal opinion, I think it's a very good metaphor for how LGBTQ people are treated and ostracized in society, and I think it really worked. I mean, some people argue that, but I actually think that Trill disassociation is a good thing, that they shouldn't, re-hook up with people, exes from a different previous life. But that's not the point. It doesn't matter whether or not you think the Trill are right or wrong for doing that. What is clearly wrong is the fact that they're willing to ostracize, which is a death sentence for the symbiote for doing that, which is a way overreaction regardless of what you think of it. And so in that way, I think it's a very good allegory to how LGBTQ people are ostracized in modern day society. So, yeah, I wouldn't even mention this because they just do it, and plus it's kind of a cheap trick that they do by having Odan's new host be a woman. That's why I said it like I did, because it seems like they're just trying to shock you and be like, oh my god, and especially the way that when Crusher is like, hears that the new host is here, it's like, oh great, the new host is here. And when this woman steps in and says, I am to be host for Odan, she's like, what? She looks actively shocked and disappointed. Which again, and to be clear, they've been playing Beverly as childish and immature throughout the entire episode, so it just kind of fits with that. It's stupid. But then you get the ending scene, and where I'll get more into this when I get into the Patreon comments, because I don't think Beverly is being homophobic here. I talked about this in other episodes, or other videos I did on this episode, where she's heterosexual, and someone who is heterosexual turning down someone of the same sex is not being homophobic. It's just, if you be like, oh fuck you, the F word, I'm not going to say the F word, not fuck, but the other F word, I just don't feel comfortable saying it. But if the person is like, fuck you, F word, how dare you, you're disgusting, that's one thing, that's homophobic for sure, but that's not what she does. She's just very calmly, very rationally, just flat out I'm sorry, I just can't do this. And the reason she doesn't even mention, by the way, same sex, because she just mentions the fact that the Trill symbiont goes from body to body, and it's just too weird for her. I mean, to be fair, she even thought that with Riker, but eventually just gave in to her passions or whatever. But then now there's another body to put up with, and it's just another thing, and so that, and she even admits it's a human failing, and so you could argue that that has a lot more to do with it than the sex of Odan, his now being a woman. That being said, the scene where the woman shows up and says she's host, and Beverly's obviously upset and disappointed, kind of what gives that scene that homophobic slant, because even though, oh no, it has nothing to do with that, it's sick of you going from body to body. But when you saw how upset she was when she saw a woman, it really implies that she was totally totally going to continue her relationship with Odan, with the new host. That was totally her plan until she saw her as a woman. So, yeah, you could, but again, even so, I wouldn't say it's homophobic, because it's not homophobic to be heterosexual. Just as long as you're like, no, I appreciate this and I still love you and always will, but this is, it's just not what I'm into, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But the show is a fucking coward because it just has O'Don kiss Beverly's wrist. Get some wrist action in there. Come on, you fucking coward. Have them kiss. I mean, I think I think that would make sense, even for Beverly. And I think that would be a beautiful way to end this somewhat failure of an episode. Because even though she's not into women, she's not into O'Don, she doesn't want to continue the relationship, but she says, I will always love you. So if she kissed her and Beverly reciprocated and it was a goodbye kiss, that would have been powerful. But no! We can't have two women kissing on TV in the early 90s. The studio will go... And it's not until the aforementioned Rejoined, which came out, 5 years later? 4 or 5 years later, something like that, when they finally did, and it was one of the early examples, not the first, to be clear, but one of the early examples of same-sex kisses on popular television. So it was very risky, and Deep Space Nine did get into a lot of shit because of it. So, to be fair, it's even if the writers, producers, and directors wanted to do it, the studios and the money men would probably come in and shut it down. Because I talked about how they did that for The Offspring, where they were going to have a same-sex couple kissing in the background, but some fucking narc went and told the studios, and the bigwig showed up and like, no, and shut it down. Fuckers. But anyway, and then there was the whole thing about David Gerrold wanting, and Gene Roddenberry wanting Gene Roddenberry commissioned David Gerrold to write an episode that was the AIDS allegory that featured the same-sex couple prominently, and the studio absolutely shut it down. So yeah, they were all good with doing stupid allegory bullshits like The Outcast, which I already talked about when I covered The Outcast. But not actually. They were too chicken shit to act, and by they I mean the producers, not the people directly involved with this show, like Michael Piller and all them. Maybe Rick Berman too. I think Rick Berman is one of the people who shut it down, because of course Rick Berman was. Fuck Rick Berman. Where's that pillow? It'd be like Lore Runner and beat up the pillow. So I copied this bit. I stole this bit from Lore Runner, but I'm still going to do it anyway. Hi, I'm Rick Berman! Anyway, that's fun. I can see why he does that a lot. Nice way to take out your aggression on Rick Berman. But anyway, but yeah, so there were two chicken shits, but the wrist kissing thing was, at least it's something, It was a nice moment, but it would have been so much nicer if it was an actual kiss. They had her kiss Riker, but no, you gotta draw the line at kissing another woman. Anywho, I think that's pretty much all I gotta say about this episode. So, I would like to thank all my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. It does help me continue with this channel. Really motivates me to keep going, and I do appreciate everyone's support, but especially a special shout out to Brandon Neilhouse for all your support throughout the years. Thank you so much for your support. But I'd also like to give a shout out to Antarius, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Lavals, Alessandro Miguelisio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you so much for your support. I almost wanted to say the names like differently every time. Like, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brattenberg. But I don't know. Like, it's like Jessie Ginger. She sings the list of her Patreon supporters. And I don't know. I'm not really into that. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe I'll do that in the future. But anyway, thank you. Yes, thank you all for your support. So we do have a few Patreon comments on this episode, if I can find them. No, that's not it. Here they are. Okay. First comment is from Kyrie091, who says, the host, more like the Nopes. That's okay. That's a fair one. Anyway, next comment is from Norman Buckwald, who says, this may be the best attempt at a romance of the week for Crusher, but it gets dinged because how the writers had Crusher react when the symbiont gets transferred to a woman. May not even be intentional, but to many viewers, the episode is interpreted to be a reinforcement of heteronormality. Maybe it would have been better in this case if it was just a handsome man, but Crusher lost her patience and may even admit maybe she is a bit too much surface than she wished, which I think was what they were, what they attempted to do, but it didn't help. My very good friend Frederick had for years hated Crusher as a character for being homophobic. In fact, even though I at least let him know that Gates McFadden had often criticized and did not agree with how they had Crusher react in that scene, this episode of course introduces us to the Trill, which, while different in appearance because Berman wanted Jadzia to look more sexy, is a wonderful contribution of an intriguing and complex species. Putting Crusher and Riker sort of together was also intriguing, although they made it that Riker himself had no control, I guess by writers to avoid any issues between characters. Hey, they don't have any salamander babies, I'd argue, if that was their concern. In addition to the unintentional heteronormative message it seems to give Crusher, the 7th season... it also made Crusher, yet at the same time exotic because of the symbiont, which until the 7th season, I recall some fans say Crusher was strange to not have a problem with that, demonstrating well their limitations. I know when they said that. Of course, Crusher would later be remembered with association with a candle, so I guess some got over that. Laugh out loud. Anyway, this episode was fine enough, although I admit most relationships of the weeks do not usually rank highly for me. I'll give it a 7.5 symbionts to be loved and admired, regardless of the inner symbiotic relationship, out of 10. Worms need love too, after all, smiley face. So Crusher was, or Gates McFadden, I should say, was pregnant during the filming of this episode, which I think they do an amazing job of hiding it, because I could not tell. Like, sometimes it's very obvious when they're trying to hide someone being pregnant. And the one thing that Crusher, or Gates McFadden, I keep calling her Crusher, one thing Gates McFadden said later on was that she liked the fact that they gave her a romance episode. They just she wished that they waited until she wasn't pregnant to film it, and so she was kind of upset by that. So the other thing I wanted to mention is I was disappointed that they didn't have a scene with Crusher and Riker at the end of the episode after Riker went back to himself. In fact, they didn't show Riker at all once Udon left his body. I think it would have been interesting for him to go to Beverly and remember his experiences as Udon and like try to, and it would be very awkward between the two of them, but Riker could try to smooth things over and be like, look, he did love you, if it means anything. I remember some of it and how he felt, and he loved you passionately and all this, and I think that would have been a really nice scene. I'm really disappointed that they didn't do that. But to Norman's point about maybe it would have been better off if they just had the new host be a man and avoid the topic altogether, I agree with that. I actually agree. If you want to make it be about the Trill and the nature of the symbionts and not about yuck, it's another woman, then you would have accomplished that more by just having another handsome man be the new host. And that probably would have worked better. Also, I think I also like my idea of O'Don kissing Beverly, even when he's in the, well, she now, when she's in the woman's body. That still would have, I think, smoothed this over and not make her come off as so. I think the reason why she comes off as homophobic to some people is because of her reaction when the woman shows up, where she's like, "Oh my God, it's a woman," and I feel like they did that for shock value, and it's cheap. And if you're not gonna have the two women kiss, then don't have another woman at all. Just have it be a man. I think that would, either of those would avoid her coming off as homophobic. But honestly, I still stand by my stance that I don't think she is, because she is just saying it's just not for me, which everyone has the right to be heterosexual or homosexual, bisexual, whatever, pansexual, whatever sexual under the sun. Everyone has the right to have their own preference and to be like, yeah, I mean, it's just not for me. And so that's all I see her do. But I think the yicky face she makes when the woman shows up, that's what spins it. And they just did that for shock value. So that's bad writing or bad directing on the episode's creators' parts. And also I would note that the director of this episode, who I think was Marvin, oh God, what was it? Was it Marvin Rush? So it's the guy who's usually the DP, the director of photography, who came on during season 3, and he was the cinematographer for almost every episode of Star Trek. And I read somewhere that the previous episode, Half a Life, was like the only episode of Next Gen that who wasn't the director of photography for, which I don't think is true, because I thought in the later seasons he left to go do Deep Space Nine and missed more episodes. But this is what Memory Alpha is saying, so I don't know. But anyway, he missed that episode because he was directing this episode, so he had to do prep work for this episode and couldn't be involved in making it. Anyway, I'm trying to find his name. I'm pretty sure it's Marvin Rush. But anyway, he has been on the record saying that he doesn't think that Beverly was being homophobic at the end of the episode. Marvin Rush, that is his name. So he said, I felt that it was more about the nature of love, why we love, and what prevents us from loving. To me, the best analogy is your beloved turned into a cockroach. Could you love a cockroach? It's the same person if the person is the personality in the core within. But you get past the outside. We as humans are affected by the whole package, including the outside shell. And Gates, in her last scene, talks about maybe someday our ability to love won't be so limited. She says mankind may one day be able to deal with this, but I can't. To me, that's about the nature of love, and I think it's an interesting, worthy discussion rather than deal with the fact it was because of any homosexual bent per se. It's just that in our culture, in our society, people who are heterosexual, who want the companionship of a male because they are female, wouldn't be able to deal with that opposite situation. And maybe that's more true in the 90s than it is now as well, to be fair. But I think Norman's point stands that if really that was the point that he was trying to get across, did not just avoid the whole same-sex thing and just have another handsome man, because that would actually hammer the point down. That's the weird switching through bodies that's throwing her off, and not yucky, it's another woman. Just saying. Anyway, next comment is, hold on, let me bring it up again. I lost my spot. Next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, "What a boring episode. Why do all the romance episodes involving Beverly suck the absolute life out of me? This episode isn't a complete crap show. At least they introduced the Trill. It's weird that they are complete opposite of what we see in Deep Space Nine. I like the makeup. They should have kept that instead of the paint design we see on Dax. So the symbiont is the dominant force here. I prefer what Deep Space Nine did with the Trill. Does Riker have any shame? He will do anything to get laid. Are we 100% sure Jack Crusher is actually Picard's kid? My rating is 4. If Riker lived in the 80s or the 90s, he would have been a porn star. Move over, Ron Jeremy. Here comes Riker to ruin your life out of 10. That's really funny stuff. And yes, we're sure that Riker is not Jack Crusher's father, because the time frame does not mix up. Jack Crusher would have to be much older. Yeah, I think you're unfair to Riker, who's being controlled by another being. Give him a break. But it just so happens he gets laid, you know. But I did want to mention, because Norman mentioned earlier that he thought this was the best Beverly romance, and I've been on record saying I think that's Transfigurations, even though that doesn't blossom to like a full romance. I think what's implied there is beautiful and way, way better than this episode. Way better. But I know everyone, I think Norman hates Transfigurations. Most people do. I don't know why. I think it's a really good episode. Clearly the best, because I talked about it when I reviewed that episode, that the only real Beverly romances we get is that, this, and Sub Rosa, where she falls in love with a Condor ghost. God. I don't know if there's any others I'm forgetting about. Oh, well, you could say Attached with Picard, but I don't really count that. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And so I think Transfiguration is the clear winner, but that's just me. Anyway, next comment is from Antarius, who says, so many inconsistencies between this episode and the later Trills. I think it would have been better if they had created a new race for Jadzia Dax. The biggest ones, Trills can't use the transporter, and here it is shown in such a way that the host personality is completely suppressed. I can't believe the Federation is unaware of the symbiotic nature of the Trill at this point. The symbiont is much too big to fit into Riker's abdomen. I was thinking the same thing, actually. It's like, Riker should have this giant bulge, because his insides aren't meant to take that. But anyway, unless Beverly removed his intestines or other vital organs. Yucky. The problem of the aliens centered around their energy production and their ecological consequences is very interesting and up to date, but sadly it is only mentioned at the beginning, and the negotiations happen off screen. All in all, this episode is boring most of the time. I was thinking about giving it a 4, but ultimately my rating is a 3 out of 10. Yeah, they did invent a new species for Deep Space Nine. They just called it the same thing, which is the mistake. The Trill and Deep Space Nine are effectively a totally different race. So they should have called it different, just to match that. They shouldn't have called it the Trill. Period. Point blank. End of story. But anywho, thank you, patrons. very much for your comments. So, my rating for The Host out of 10 is going to be a 4 poor. I had the same sort of internal discussion as I believe Antarius did, where Antarius stated that they weren't sure if they were going to give it a 3 or a 4, but went with a 3. I was also debating giving this a 3, but I was like, it's not that bad. So I think a 4 is definitely... The fact that I almost wasn't going to give it a negative rating at first at all and give it like a 6 or 5. Well, 5 is still negative technically. But, yeah, just talking through it and talking about how faulty this episode is and how it failed to pull up. I mean, there were some things that worked, which is why I wouldn't give it a 3. Like, as I said, I liked what Deanna said to the Crusher, and some of the Crusher having a difficulty with what the situation going on. Like, I like how Picard was like, I'm there for you, and she hugs him. Like, that was nice too. So there's some nice things about this episode. And I like the war storyline. I just think it shouldn't have been fucking resolved off screen. God fucking damn it. But yeah, there were some things about this episode that worked that to me would save it from getting a 3. But still gets a negative rating, still gets a 4 because too much fails. I think the whole romance, as I said, Ronald D. Moore was like, oh, we found the romance and that saved the episode. Actually, that tanked the episode because the romance is horrible. It's not developed very well. Beverly's acting really out of character and adolescent throughout most of the episode, and I never was attached or invested in this romance, so I never gave a shit about anything that was happening regardless. So most of the scenes involving Crusher's difficulty of dealing with O'Donnell Riker's body just came off as melodramatic and silly to me. So, give it a 4. So that is it for my review of The Host. So coming up next on my channel, next Monday, I'll be over on Patreon for my Patreon supporters, where I'll be doing a revisiting my review for The Mind's Eye. That will be Monday over on Patreon. Wednesday, I'll be back here, public for everyone to see, for a new review with In Theory. Thursday, covering the next Discovery episode. And then Saturday, back over on Patreon I go for another revisited for my Patreon supporters, this time revisiting the 2-parter Redemption Parts 1 and 2. So that's what's coming up on my channel, so be sure to check it out as I continue to cover Next Generation and also cover many other Star Trek videos and mini videos and other shows and films as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.